On a warm Arkansas night in 1995, the crack of baseball bats and children's laughter filled the air at a Little League game in Alma. 6-year-old Morgan Nick was among them, chasing fireflies with friends just feet away from her mother Colleen in the stands. At 10:30 p.m., Morgan walked 75 yards to empty her sand from her shoes, a mundane moment that would haunt an entire community for decades to come. She vanished without a trace, leaving behind only empty shoes and unanswered questions. This is the story of a disappearance that changed how America searches for missing children and a mother's relentless quest to bring her daughter home. I'm Allie, and this is True Crime from my couch. You know that moment when your heart stops, when you're at the store or the park or maybe a baseball game, and suddenly you can't see your child? For most of us, that moment ends in relief. A quick scan of the crowd, and there they are, safe, smiling, and completely unaware of the panic they just caused. But on June 9th, 1995, in Alma, Arkansas, that moment never ended for Colleen Nick. I'm sitting here on my couch tonight, with my coffee getting cold beside me, and I'm looking at a photograph of a 6-year-old girl with the kind of smile that lights up a room. And I need to warn you, this isn't an easy story to tell, but it's one that we need to talk about. Because somewhere, someone knows something about what happened to Morgan Nick. Let me take you to Alma, Arkansas in 1995. Picture this. You're driving down Highway 71, that crucial artery connecting Louisiana to Missouri. You pull into a town of just under 4,000 people, where the Mountain Grove Dairy Bar still serves the best chocolate malts in 3 counties, and the Little League field is the place to be on a Friday night. It's the kind of town where people still wave from their porches, where kids ride their bikes until the streetlights come on, and where nobody, and I mean nobody, ever expected to become the center of one of Arkansas's most haunting mysteries. Morgan Chantel Nick wasn't just another face in a school photo. Born on September 12, 1988, she was that kid who'd spend hours making up elaborate stories for her stuffed animals. Especially her favorite, a worn-out teddy bear named Fuzzy that went everywhere with her. Her mom, Colleen, still has a box of notes Morgan used to hide around their house. "I love you, Mommy," written in wobbly first-grade letters, usually decorated with hearts and stars. Let me describe Morgan for you, because these details matter. She stood 4 feet tall, just tall enough to rest her chin on the kitchen counter where she helped her mom bake cookies. She had this blonde hair that her teacher said looked like spun gold in the sunlight. And her eyes, the brightest blue you'd ever seen, the kind that crinkled at the corners when she laughed. She wore a size 6 in clothes, and on that Friday night in June, she had on a green Girl Scouts t-shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes with little blue ankle socks. June 9th, 1995 started like any Arkansas summer day. If you've lived there, you know exactly what I mean. That thick, heavy air that makes you feel like you're swimming just walking to your car. The temperature hit 85 degrees by noon, those familiar afternoon thunderheads building up over the Ozarks. Nothing special about it. Nothing to suggest it would become a day that would change how America handles missing children's cases. Around 7:30 that evening, Morgan asked her mom if they could go to a Little League game in Alma. It was about a 45-minute drive from their home in Ozark. You know how summer evenings go. Spontaneous decisions that seem so normal at the time. Colleen said yes, and they hopped in the car, probably singing along to the radio on the drive over. Let me walk you through the Alma Little League field, because every detail of this location matters. Picture a typical small-town baseball field. Metal bleachers that get hot enough to fry an egg during day games, a chain link backstop, gravel parking lot with those tall field lights on metal poles. That night, there were between 250 and 300 people scattered around. Parents in lawn chairs, kids running around with snow cones, that constant background noise of aluminum bats pinging and people cheering. Now, here's where we need to pay attention to every minute. At 8:45 p.m., 3 different people noticed something that would keep them awake for years to come. A red Ford pickup truck circling the parking lot. Not just passing through, but circling. The driver was described as a white male, somewhere between 23 and 38 years old, about 6 feet tall, wearing a red baseball cap. Not exactly someone who'd stand out at a baseball game, right? Let me take you to 9:30 p.m. The game's winding down, and Morgan meets 2 other kids near the bleachers. Jessica Martinez, 8 years old, and Tommy Parker, 10. Now, if you're a parent, you know how this goes. You're watching the game, but you're also doing that casual check every few minutes. Morgan was right there, playing with her new friends, visible from where Colleen sat in the bleachers. At 10:30 p.m., and I need you to remember this time, the kids asked if they could go catch fireflies. They were about 75 yards from the bleachers, near those tall parking lot lights I mentioned earlier. Remember, this is 1995 in small-town Arkansas, at a community baseball game, with hundreds of people around, the kind of request parents granted without a second thought. Let me introduce you to Karen Davidson. She was sitting in the 3rd row bleachers that night, and what she remembers haunts her to this day. At 10:35 p.m., she saw Morgan walking toward her friends near that parking lot light pole. She had this little skip in her walk, Karen told investigators. Just a happy kid, wearing that green Girl Scout shirt that looked kind of bluish under the parking lot lights. Now we're at 10:45 p.m. Jessica and Tommy came back without Morgan. When asked where she was, they say she was by their car, emptying sand from her shoes. But she never returned to the bleachers, never made it back to Colleen. Think about that for a second. In less than 10 minutes, in a crowded parking lot with hundreds of people around, a 6-year-old girl vanished. Here's where things get frustrating. In 1995, there was no Amber Alert system, no standardized protocol for missing children. When Colleen made that first frantic 911 call at 11:15 p.m., the response was, well, let me walk you through it. By 11:30 p.m., local police had finally arrived. But here's the thing about small-town police departments in 1995. They'd never handled anything like this before. The first officer on the scene, Deputy Mark Trent, later said it was like trying to solve a puzzle while someone's mixing up the pieces. Let me paint this picture for you. It's approaching midnight in Alma. The temperature's still hovering around 75 degrees. You've got parents with flashlights combing every inch of that baseball field. Police are going car to car in the parking lot, and Colleen, she's standing under those harsh parking lot lights, clutching Morgan's jacket, watching her worst nightmare unfold. Remember that red Ford pickup I mentioned earlier? Let's talk about James Miller. He was working the late shift at the Gas and Go, just a quarter mile from the baseball field. At 7:45 p.m., almost 3 hours before Morgan disappeared, he saw something that would later keep him up at night. A red pickup pulls into his lot, but the driver never gets out. He just sits there, engine running, watching the ballpark entrance. Miller remembers because the truck had this distinctive feature. The passenger side headlight was dimmer than the driver's side. By 2 a.m. on June 10th, this is what investigators knew. Morgan was last seen wearing a green Girl Scout shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes. A red Ford pickup, likely a late 80s model, had been circling the area. The suspect was described as a white male, 6 feet tall, wearing a red baseball cap. And at least 4 witnesses reported seeing him watching children near the bleachers. But here's what they didn't know yet. This wasn't the first time someone had reported a suspicious red truck near youth sports events in the area. Know what strikes me about this case? How it changed everything. The next morning, parents across Arkansas were having conversations they never thought they'd need to have. Little league fields across the state started installing security cameras. Schools implemented strict pickup procedures. That small-town trust? It didn't exactly disappear, but it changed, evolved. Let's talk about how this investigation evolved, because it's fascinating and frustrating. By day 3, the FBI was involved. They brought in something new for 1995, psychological profiling. The profile they developed suggested this wasn't some random opportunity. The person in that red truck? they'd planned this. They knew that baseball field, knew the game schedules, knew exactly where kids might wander away from their parents. Here's something that'll make you think. Highway 71. Remember how I mentioned it connects Louisiana to Missouri? The FBI's geographic profilers found something interesting. Between 1993 and 1995, there were 3 attempted abductions along that same highway. The same description of the truck, the same type of locations, places where kids might momentarily be out of their parents' sight. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. Let me tell you about Teresa Hamilton. She was working the concession stand that night, and something caught her eye around 10:15 p.m. There was this man, she told investigators, walking like he was heading to the restroom, but he never went in, just stood there watching the kids playing near the bleachers. She described him as wearing work boots, jeans, and that red baseball cap everyone remembers. Now, this is where things get interesting. They found shoe prints in the sand near where Morgan was last seen. Size 12 work boots, probably Thorogood brand based on the tread pattern. They also found tire tracks, distinctive because one tire was a different brand than the others. Small details that meant nothing to most people, but everything to investigators. Here's something that bothered investigators for years. Between 10:45 p.m., when Morgan disappeared, and 11:15 p.m., when Colleen called 911, someone had to drive away from that baseball field. But in all the chaos of parents leaving after the game, nobody remembers seeing that red truck leave. It's like it vanished into thin air, along with Morgan. Let me tell you how they're working on this case today, because it'll blow your mind. They're using something called touch DNA analysis. Back in '95, if you found a fingerprint, you needed a pretty clear print and a suspect to match it to. Today, they can pull DNA from a piece of tape somebody touched for half a second. They're literally going back through every piece of evidence with these new techniques. Think about this. In 1995, hardly anyone had a cell phone. But today, they're using cell tower data from that night to track every phone that pinged near that baseball field. They can actually map movement patterns from nearly 30 years ago. They're even using artificial intelligence to analyze every witness statement, every police report, looking for connections humans might have missed. You know what amazes me about this case? How Colleen Nick took this tragedy and turned it into something that helps other families. The Morgan Nick Foundation, let me tell you what they do. They've helped locate over 800 missing children. Think about that number for a second. That's 800 families who got their children back because of what started here. In 2023, something interesting happened. Someone came forward with a photo from that baseball game. Just a casual snapshot, but in the background, a red truck. The photo's been through every kind of analysis you can imagine. They can even tell what kind of tires it had based on enhanced imaging. Every new piece of technology brings us closer to answers. Let me walk you through what the cold case unit does today. They've got this saying, no detail is too small, no lead too old. Every month, they re-interview witnesses because sometimes people remember details years later. They run old evidence through new DNA tests. They check tips against their database of similar cases, and they update their geographic profile as new information comes in. Let me share something that happened just last year. A man cleaning out his grandfather's garage in Van Buren, that's about 15 minutes from Alma, found receipts from a body shop. June 1995, repairs on a red Ford pickup with a misaligned headlight. Seems small, right? But in cases like this, small details can crack everything wide open. The cold case unit spent 3 months tracking down every customer from that shop. Here's something that keeps investigators up at night. They mapped every similar case within 500 miles of Alma between 1990 and 2000. Know what they found? A pattern following major trucking routes. Not just Highway 71, but connecting roads too. like pieces of a puzzle nobody knew to look for back then. Investigators now believe the person responsible might have been a long-haul trucker, someone who knew these roads like the back of their hand. You want to know the real impact of this case? Walk into any school in Arkansas today. Those security cameras, those sign-in procedures, the way they track who picks up kids, that started after Morgan disappeared. One night changed everything about how we protect our children. Morgan would be 35 now. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they do these incredible age progression photos. They use pictures of her parents, her siblings, study family features to know what she might look like today. The most recent one shows a woman with those same bright blue eyes that Colleen remembers, that same slight dimple in her chin. As I sit here in 2024, this case is more active than ever. Last month alone, they interviewed a new witness who remembered seeing that red truck at a gas station in Fort Smith the day before Morgan disappeared. As of 2024, after nearly 30 years, police have finally named their prime suspect. And here's the kicker, they'd actually interviewed this guy before. His name was Billy Jack Links, and the evidence pointing to him, DNA found in his truck that matches Morgan's. But let me back up a bit, because this story gets wild. See, Links wasn't exactly a model citizen. Just 3 months after Morgan disappeared, he tried to kidnap another little girl, an 11-year-old. He literally tried to bribe her away from her brothers and friends, saying some pretty graphic things to her. Thank God she ran away. And get this, someone got his license plate number, which led to his arrest. But wait, there's more. Turns out, back in '92, Links had been arrested for sexually abusing a young family member under 14. He got off pretty light though, just a fine and community service. Plus, a stay away from the victim order. No jail time. He was still on parole when Morgan disappeared. Now, you might be wondering, why did it take so long to connect these dots? Well, police actually did interview Links way back when. They noticed his red truck matched a witness description, and they even found blood and blonde hair inside. But here's the frustrating part. At the time, there wasn't enough DNA for a match, and apparently, Links was pretty convincing when he denied any involvement. So investigators moved on. Links died in prison in 2000, serving time for that attempted kidnapping I mentioned earlier. But in 2020, investigators tracked down his old truck. Yep, the same one. And an FBI evidence team went to work. They vacuumed that truck like it was spring cleaning, collecting multiple canisters of evidence. Fast forward to this year, when a specialized lab in Texas confirmed what many had suspected. They found Morgan's DNA in the truck. Morgan's mom, Colleen, released a heartbreaking statement about Links. She said he robbed their family, stealing Morgan from her parents and siblings, Logan and Taryn. But she added something powerful, that he could never win, because their love for Morgan, her memory, her voice, it outlasted his life, and that love continues to shine. Morgan is still missing, and investigators are still working to piece together exactly what happened to her. They're asking anyone who knew Links to come forward, from his time growing up in Crawford County, his Army service in World War II, or his years working at Braniff Airlines in Dallas from 1962 to 74. They say no detail is too small. Let me tell you what the Morgan Nick Foundation does today. They don't just help find missing kids, though they have found hundreds. Every year, they train 5,000 law enforcement officers in rapid response protocols. They work with 10,000 school staff members on child safety. They help parents understand online safety and predator tactics. And they support families going through their own missing child nightmares. And they do it all for free. Here's the thing about cases like this. Somebody knows something. Maybe they didn't realize it was important back then. Maybe they've been afraid to come forward. Maybe they just noticed something that seemed odd but never connected it to Morgan's case. If you're out there, if you remember something about that night in Alma, June 9th, 1995, it's not too late. Maybe you saw that red truck somewhere else that day, or you remember someone acting strangely around that time. Maybe you heard something that didn't make sense until later, or maybe you have a photo from that baseball game or that summer. You can reach out anonymously. I'll leave all of the information below in the description for you. You know, sitting here on my couch, looking at Morgan's photo, I can't help but think about how one moment changed so many lives. But this story isn't over. Not as long as there's a chance of finding answers. Not as long as her case continues to protect other children. Not as long as we remember that summer night in Alma when a community learned that sometimes the unthinkable happens, but also learned how to fight back. Tonight, somewhere in Arkansas, Colleen Nick is still waiting for answers about her daughter. And somewhere, someone has those answers. It's never too late to do the right thing. Never too late to bring Morgan home. This has been True Crime from My Couch. I'm Allie, reminding you to hold your loved ones close. And remember, sometimes the smallest detail can break the biggest case wide open. Good night and stay safe. Thanks for tuning in. Before you go, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me reach more listeners just like you. You can also support the show by leaving a quick 5-star review on your favorite podcast. You can also support the show by leaving a quick 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Want to join the conversation? Follow me on social media at True Crime from My Couch.